allows us to build our lives. Layer by layer, brick by brick, we are laying a foundation by the choices we make. When we live wisely, it's like building on a rock. When we make foolish choices, it's like building on sand. A rock stays strong when life gets hard, but sand crumbles and falls. Build your faith today. Trust Jesus with the plan.
Well, good morning again, everybody. We're starting a new series today called Building Blocks. The idea behind the series, that's an Easter series, is that we are still in the Easter season. It's not just one day. Easter season runs for 50 days up until Pentecost, when we remember the coming of the Holy Spirit. Pentecost just means 50 days. Did you know that? Penta 5, Pentecost 50. It just means 50 days after Easter. And so during these 50 days, we're going to be talking about the foundations of the Christian religion. So Easter being the foundation upon which everything else is built. Without Jesus, without Easter, none of this is happening. None of this is here. And so we're going to be talking about what does faith mean? What does it mean to serve? Why is community important? All of these things are the building blocks that are built off of Easter that create the life of a Christian. We're going to be talking about all of those things together in worship over the course of the next several weeks. It's kind of this Lego theme. If you got kiddos, I know that the kids' bags that are yours to take have lots of cool stuff in them. There's Legos in there. There's like sunglasses that look like Legos. So make sure you grab those. Those are our free gift to you for kiddos if you want to take those. Parents, I know you'd appreciate having more Legos in your house, so make sure you grab that. But today we're going to be talking about what is faith. We worship on Easter the resurrected Christ. It takes faith to believe in what happened on Easter. But we throw this word faith around, I think, so much that we've actually kind of lost the meaning of what it actually means. Maybe you've heard phrases like, just have faith, just keep the faith. Maybe you've heard phrases like, that might be popular in our country here, like faith, family, football. Those are our values, right? A leap of faith. Blind faith. So what is faith in all of these contexts? We've lost some of the vision of what it really truly means to have faith. And so we're going to be talking today in worship about what it means from a Christian perspective. And I think one of the things that we actually believe based on the idea that we attach faith often to a religious belief, don't we? Faith most often comes with a religious context. And I think because of this, we believe that people in our world, some of them have faith, and some of them don't. A religious person is a person of faith. Therefore, a person who maybe isn't religious, regardless of that religion, we would not identify them as a person of faith. But the reality is we're all people of faith, regardless of who we are. It is impossible to live in our world today without faith. Let me tell you what I mean. Something as small as brushing your teeth in the morning, which I hope you all did today, is an act of faith. Why? Because you are trusting the toothpaste and the toothbrush manufacturers and the dental association that what you're doing for you is healthy, that it's good. It's good for your teeth beyond just helping your breath, that it's healthy for your teeth. Okay? We go further than that, don't we? We trust our history books to tell us the truth about history. We put faith in the record keepers that tell us that George Washington was the first president of the U.S. Were you there? No, I don't think anybody was. So we have to put our faith in someone's testimony that is true. When we drive, we put faith in the people around us that they're going to follow the rules of the road. Driving on, my wife goes into Columbia every day, and it stresses me out because of B on 124. It stresses me out that there's people driving 70 miles an hour with nothing in between you and the other person. They decide to text for 1 second or whatever, and it's a different world for you. We put our faith in other people when we drive. We put faith in our vehicle when we drive. If you would like to fly to California, that's a lot of faith you're putting in other people. Because here's what happens. They say, the airlines say, you give us a bunch of money, and we're going to put hundreds of you up in this tube, and it's going to fly hundreds of miles an hour, thousands of feet in the air. Everything's going to be fine. You just have to trust us. And we do. Why? Based on the testimony of the people who put together airplanes and do your safety checks, and the testimony of people who have flown before us. We put faith in all sorts of things. We even put faith in abstract ideas. This is what we talked about on Easter and all throughout Lent leading up to Easter. That we put our faith in various things to bring us the fulfillment that we seek. We put our faith in money to make us feel secure. We put our faith in relationships to make us feel worthy. See where I'm getting at? We put our faith in all sorts of things. And all of these things really have real life ramifications. Faith changes the way that we live. Because I put faith in the toothpaste to do what it's supposed to do, I brush my teeth. Because I put faith in the airline companies, I choose to fly. Because I put faith in my car and the drivers around me, I drive to and fro where I have to go. Faith changes the way that we live. If you don't think that's true, I'm going to share with you some examples. Now, if this is you, know that I don't care. This is a judgment-free zone. I just find it curious. I've always been fascinated by individuals who put foreign languages on their bodies permanently that they don't speak. It's one thing if you speak it, do your thing. But when you don't speak it, that seems like a big risk, right? Let me tell you what I mean. I got some pictures off the internet about some friends with various experiences. Let's see. She got a Hebrew tattoo that was supposed to say butterfly, but instead she got fly, the pest, and butter, the stuff you put on bread, is what her tattoo says. It doesn't say butterfly. It says margarine bug. This guy scanned his tattoo of Chinese lettering that says turkey sandwich, is what this guy's tattoo says. This says, hello, my friend got this tattoo on her right wrist and has no idea what it means. Your translation would be greatly appreciated. Her tattoo means toilet demon, according to a translator. And here's one that says, never trust what you see on Tumblr, because she got a tattoo in Arabic that she thought meant appreciate life, and it actually says that I'm rotten. What we put our faith in has real life ramifications. Who and what we put our faith in has real life ramifications, but we're always trusting in someone's testimony when we put our faith in something. It was someone's testimony, whether it was on the internet or on a sheet of paper or the testimony of Google Translate, that said that that's the tattoo that they were going for. They put their faith in that testimony. We put our faith in the testimony of doctors. We put our faith in the testimony of our family and our friends at our office and all sorts of things. Everything we believe is based on testimony. Apart from fact, and even facts you could argue, mathematical fact, I don't really know how or why we came to the mathematical conclusions we did. I just trust somebody that 2 and 2 makes 4. It's somebody's testimony that we believe. So, what testimony do we choose to believe? What testimony do we choose to believe? Because it matters whose testimony we believe. If you believe my testimony about, what's in your toothpaste or how to make an airplane fly, you're in trouble. My testimony doesn't mean anything. Whose testimony do we trust? Trusted Airlines, the American Dental Association, right? So when it comes to these bigger abstract things, then, we can think about our scriptures as a testimony that's had thousands upon thousands of years of people trusting it. So when we say, well, how do we know that the Bible can be a reality? Well, beyond just the reasonability of when we dive into the scriptures and where they came from and how they came to be, that's a different sermon series for a different time. We can trust the testimony of people who have committed their lives to these scriptures over the course of not just hundreds, not just tens, but thousands of years. There's not too many things in our world that we put faith in that has that much testimony attached to it. We have the reliability of the length of the Christian tradition that, of course, has its roots in the Jewish tradition in these same scriptures. And so when we talk about what are we going to put our faith in and what is faith and how does that make a difference for my life, we can rely on the scriptures to help us out a little bit. And so we're going to read in Hebrews chapter 11. We'll start in verse 1 and we'll read a couple of other verses. But what's happening in Hebrews Hebrews is strange to think that there's a book called Hebrews in the New Testament. Have you ever thought about that? Hebrews seems like that's the Old Testament, right? But what's happening in Hebrews is that the author, who's unnamed and unknown, is writing to a group of Jewish Christians. And what this author does is he connects the characters of the Jewish faith to Jesus, and says Jesus is the new and improved version of that. That these Jewish Christians are holding on to some of their Jewish traditions that they don't necessarily need to, and in fact can actually hinder their Christian faith and their Christian practice. And so the author is trying to set straight this community of believers what it can mean to have faith in Jesus. If you're the type of person that says, well, we've got the New Testament and Jesus came, so why do we pay any attention to the Old Testament? Read Hebrews, and you can begin to understand the connection and why it's important for us to have a good foundation of our Old Testament knowledge to understand the New Testament more properly. But I want to check out verse 1 really fast in Hebrews 11, but I have two different versions of it up on the screen for you here of Hebrews 11. I never, this might maybe the... I can count on my hand how many times I have ever shared anything from the King James Version of the Bible, but I think it's helpful for this. And I wanted to give a couple different translations of our scriptures here, and I have a couple of them underlined as well so you can see some of the differences and why it matters. The CEB, which stands for Common English Bible, which is actually one of the celebrated translations from the Methodist Church. It says, faith is the reality. Here's Hebrews about what faith is. Faith is the reality of what we hope for, the proof of what we do not see. The reality of what we hope for, the proof of what we do not see. Then in the King James Version, which if you know anything about Bible translations, takes a much more a word-for-word approach, which if you know anything about translating can become problematic because words don't line up one for one in foreign languages, right? But here's what the King James Version comes up with. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So according to this passage, what is faith? Faith is, first, a substance. That's a weird thing. We don't normally relate that, do we? Faith is a substance. We've already established the fact that faith changes things. It has real-life ramifications. So the scriptures say faith isn't merely this mental construct, this cognitive understanding that we have, but it's substantial. It has a substance. Secondarily, faith also is what? Something we hope for. It's not here yet, but it's something we hope for. It's not here yet, but it's also a substance. That seems contradictory, doesn't it? We're going to dive in a little bit more into what that means. But we see that it's a substance because it changes things, but it's also based on something we don't have yet. We wouldn't hope for something we already have, right? We kind of talked about how we put faith in something. We put faith in an airline. When we have landed, we no longer need faith in the airline, right? It's something we hope for in the future. It's a substance and something we have not got yet, but that we hope for. And the text continues with examples of what faith looks like. Remember, from the Old Testament perspective. So what we see is, the author says, we have faith from the beginning that this thing that we see, this world that we live in, was created by something. That it had to get here somehow, so we put faith in the existence of the things that we see around us. So even from the beginning, the world we see around us is faith. We put faith in something. He says that the seen comes from the unseen. And then he continues and talks about the faith of Abel and the faith of Enoch and the faith of Noah and the faith of Abraham, and brings up these constructs to show what faith does and what faith looks like. He says faith is a substance of something we hope for and the proof of what we don't see. Now let me show you some examples of how that's been lived out in the Old Testament. And then the next thing he does is he says, now let me tell you why I say that, and we're going to continue on in our scripture reading here together, jumping down several verses after he talks about the sort of a faith hall of fame, if you will, of all of these faithful characters from Hebrews 11, starting in verse 13. This one says this: all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. Admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. They were still living by faith when they died. So they didn't have the thing that they had faith in yet, right? So, of course, we talked about that. We said how faith is a substance. Well, what is the substance of faith? I think this passage tells us what the substance of faith is. If there's nothing we get out of today, here's the thing about what faith is and what it looks like that I want everybody to walk away with. That it's in this passage. It's straight from Scripture. I didn't even make this up. Faith is welcoming heaven from a distance. It says that they saw what God had planned from a distance and they welcomed it. Can we put that last passage back up so we can see it again? Thank you. Thanks so much. It says they did not have the things that they were living by faith about when they died. They did not receive the things promised. What did they do? They saw them from a distance and welcomed them, admitting they were foreigners and strangers on earth. Faith is to welcome heaven from a distance. We welcome heaven from a distance. What does this mean? It means that we take heaven and we try to make it a reality in our world, in our life today. We see it, we live based on this vision and this promise that God has given us. The entire book of Hebrews talks about this idea. In the Old Testament, we place faith in the God that created the world, the God that is ordering the world, and we place faith in the fact that God promised that God would bring a Messiah. We remember that on Easter in Jesus, that the Messiah would come, the Messiah would live, the Messiah would die, and the Messiah would raise from the dead. That's what we remember last week. And now the author says, we still live by faith. Jesus has changed everything about the world that we live in, but our existence is still the same. Why? Because we are waiting for the return of Jesus. But now we have Emmanuel, God with us, living on the inside of us. There's no more separation of us from sin. But what's happening is Jesus has come, Jesus has died. It changes everything, but our faith in that changes the way that we see the world around us, and we see Jesus is coming in this land that God promises us, this existence of no more crying or no more pain. A world that's formed and operated on servanthood and love and of grace and of forgiveness. This is what we see in a distance. The Old Testament heroes that Hebrews talked about saw Jesus from a distance and welcomed him. Today, we get to see Jesus closer up than anybody before, but we see the return of Jesus from a distance and we welcome it in. But this isn't based on lunacy. This is based on a reason. Why do you think the author of Hebrews includes all of those faithful people? Because he says, see, from the beginning, God created all of this. Enoch lived by faith this way. Abraham lived by faith this way. Noah lived by faith this way. We've seen the movement of God and the evidence for God. Remember the evidence and the proof of things we've not seen? Here it is, in the faith of Abraham, in the faith of Noah. It's based on reason of God's evidence everywhere. Our faith is based on the evidence of God everywhere around us. It's not based on silliness. It's not based on foolishness. That Jesus will come again and one day eventually establish his kingdom fully and entirely. But if this is the world that we see without pain, without death, without suffering, it's filled with love and servanthood and everlasting life. If this is the thing we see from a distance and we welcome it in, wouldn't you want it to get here faster? Wouldn't you want it to hurry? I don't know what that thing is for you. Maybe it's your birthday, or maybe it's Christmas, or a family reunion, or whatever it is that you look forward to. Don't you look at the calendar and you're kind of like, come on. I know I do. We try to bring the future to the present. We would want to try to hurry it up. This is how we live as Christians. We don't just see it in a distance and welcome it from afar. We try to bring it into the present reality today. Let me tell you what I mean. This example is pretty relevant today, actually. This time of year, I've been telling people you can blame me for the cold weather today. I brought my spring clothes out, so, you know. But what happens this time of year is we get like in March, you get a day or two that's like in Missouri. You get like a day or two that's like in the 60s or 70s, right? These random days, it might snow afterward, it might rain afterwards, we don't know. But in those days, people bust out their shorts and their t-shirts and their sandals, right? And those of us who maybe have been Missourians our whole life are like, dude, it's just getting cold again, you know? But we also get random, seasonably warm days in December, don't we? Do people bust out their shorts and t-shirts then? Not yet. Why? It's not time yet. But when somebody does this in March, it seems reasonable. Why? Because we can see April from a distance. We can see May from a distance. It's coming. The person who put shorts and t-shirts on in March is saying, come on, warm weather. Let's go. They are bringing the future into a present reality. To live by faith means that what we see in the distance, we live like it's already here. If faith means we see what God has in store, we see the kingdom of God, we see heaven, and we welcome it from afar, then living by faith means that we live like what we see is already here. And even though our faith is reasonable based on the evidence for God and the history of God walking alongside God's people, our reaction and response to that might seem unreasonable. It might seem unreasonable when it's 70 degrees today and I'm wearing shorts, but it's going to be 40 tomorrow. It might seem unreasonable. But we have evidence. It might seem unreasonable to do all sorts of things to bring that future reality that we see God bringing into the present today. It might seem unreasonable to welcome the people that you welcome. It might seem unreasonable to share the relationships that you share. It might seem unreasonable that in a time when many of us are strapped financially that you would bother to give some of it away. That seems unreasonable. It seems unreasonable to spend your time in a busy schedule serving in the way that you serve. In a world around us that our schedule is king and it better be filled or we're not accomplishing enough, it might seem unreasonable to say no to things. It might seem unreasonable to say yes to other things based on the vision we see of the future. See, for others that don't see heaven from a distance and aren't welcoming it close, it seems unreasonable. But all of these things that seem unreasonable become reasonable when you see heaven from afar and you begin to welcome it in and welcome it closer into the here and into the now. See, it would have seemed unreasonable for Abraham to move into a land that God says, just go, I'll show you when you get there. It seems unreasonable that Noah would build an ark before it started raining. It might seem unreasonable to us that Abel is lifted up as the faithful one among Cain and Abel, the faithful one. Because it might seem unreasonable to live like heaven is already here when we look around and say it's not. But when you see what God has in store and you want it to hurry up, you bring it into reality by the way that you live, even if it seems unreasonable. This is when faith turns in, this is the substance of faith that we talked about, because it changes the present based on your view of the future reality that God is bringing about. So, if faith is welcoming heaven from a distance, then the question is, how are we doing that? As individuals, as a church, and as a world, are we doing anything that seems unreasonable? Because if we're not doing something that seems unreasonable, our faith probably needs to grow just a little bit more. We need to get a stronger view of heaven if we're not doing anything particularly unreasonable to bring heaven into the world around us. Can you identify an area of your life that makes no sense if you don't have a view of heaven? that you would not do if it weren't for welcoming heaven from a distance? How are your priorities different from the world around you? Maybe instead of prioritizing busyness, you prioritize rest and togetherness. Maybe instead of prioritizing gossip, you prioritize positivity and uplifting others. Maybe you don't receive the same satisfaction from things that the world receives satisfaction from. Is there something in your life that you do differently because of your view of heaven? Because ultimately, if we see heaven from afar and we bring it into reality, it's going to look a little different. It's going to look a little unreasonable. But this is what we do as Christians. This is what having faith looks like. And what if the church actually took this seriously? If when you entered the doors of the church and met the church out into the community as well, that it felt like heaven, that it felt a little bit more like heaven, that you see these people who prioritize things differently because of the hope that they have. Wouldn't that be enticing? To see a people filled with hope in a time that feels hopeless? This is enticing if the church can begin to live in this way, to live within this hope, to live in a faith that welcomes heaven from a distance and begins to live in such a way that it doesn't feel so distant.